Hello, this is the Q&A practice for the 120 class. We're going to start out with some Q&A. The subject is street accident, and it's going to start out with plaintiff attorney. Ready? Mr. Sherman, you say you stepped in a puddle covered with snow. What do you mean by that? There was a hole covered with snow. As I stepped in the hole, my foot buckled under me. Which foot was it? The right foot. Now, when you stepped into the hole, your foot buckled under you. Then what happened? I fell as if in a sitting position. Where was your right foot when you fell? It was twisted under my left foot, underneath my leg. Mr. Sherman, did you see this hole before you stepped into it? No, sir. Did you know of the existence of this hole? I did not. Tell His Honor and the members of the jury how you know it was a hole that you stepped into. After I looked around to see if there was any traffic coming, I started to cross the street. The first step I took, my foot went in the hole. When I fell, I yelled, and two guys came running over. Before we get to that, Mr. Sherman, why were you unable to see the hole before you stepped into it? Because it was covered with snow. All right, when you fell, you say a couple of guys ran over to you. Did you let out a yell? Yes, I did. Who were these guys? One was Mr. Rosenberg. That is the gentleman sitting in court here? Yes, sir. Who was the other guy? I can't recall his name. Was it Mr. Adams? Yes, it was. Now, Mr. Sherman, are you able to tell us how wide or how deep this hole was that you stepped into? I guess it must have been about 5 or 6 inches deep anyhow. How do you know that? I noticed when I went to get up that the snow had been pushed away where I fell. Who picked you up? Mr. Rosenberg and Mr. Adams. Who else was there? Well, Mr. Lane came running over. Then they started to help me cross the street. How far did you get before you fell again? I did not even reach the middle of the street. Who picked you up that time? Mr. Rosenberg and Mr. Adams. How did they pick you up? Well, they took hold of me, one on each side. I told them that my leg hurt and I couldn't walk. Was Mr. Lane there too? He was coming over while they were helping me up. Where did Mr. Rosenberg and Mr. Adams take you? They took me around the corner where I work. Mr. Sherman, before you fell into this hole, did you not know of the existence of the hole? No, sir, I did not. Where did they take you from the place where you work? They took me to the emergency room of North Shore Hospital. Tell His Honor and the members of the jury what they did for you at the hospital and how long you stayed there. First, the doctor examined my leg, then they took an X-ray and put on a cast. I was kept in the hospital overnight. How did you get home, Mr. Sherman? The hospital called a cab for me, and I left on crutches with my leg in a cast. Did you observe your leg before the cast was put on? How did it look to you? Well, it was all black and blue. Okay, I'm going to switch transcripts. I'm going to read a little bit from this medical transcript that we started from the last class. We'll pick up from there. This is defense. Okay. Prior to your examination of Mr. Johnson, did you examine any police reports? Yes, I did. I wonder if you could describe to the court and the jury how you went about examining Mr. Johnson, psychiatrically, how you went about it, step by step. It's primarily an interview in which I first become satisfied that the person knows why he is there, the purpose of the interview, and to evaluate his ability to cooperate. Often it starts out with a rather detailed history. This is the easiest area for them to talk about, finally leading up to the present offense and his present situation, his present feelings about being in jail. The taking of the detailed history, is that an essential part of your examination? I feel that it is, yes. At the time that you were examining Mr. Johnson, was there anyone else present? No. Do you recall whether or not, at the time you examined Mr. Johnson, were you aware of any statements made by Mr. Johnson as they were reported in the police reports? Yes. Were you aware of a statement allegedly made by Mr. Johnson, to wit, "I'm sorry I shot the officers out there"? Yes. If I may continue, the statement allegedly went on. Mr. Johnson stated, "I just shot. It doesn't mean anything to me anyway. The way all the officers were walking around, I could have shot them with a .22 rifle. Were you aware of those statements?" I was aware of that statement, yes. Also, prior to your examination of Mr. Johnson, were you aware of the sequence of events that occurred during the morning hours of December 6, 2012? I believe I was. Well, were you aware, at least as reported in these police reports, that you had been reading? Yes. Without telling us what your opinion is, doctor, or your conclusion is, as a result of your examination and your investigation, were you able to formulate any type of opinion as to Mr. Johnson's mental condition at a time just prior to the time he fired this rifle into a dwelling home? Yes, I felt that I was. Were you also able to formulate an opinion as to his mental condition just prior to the time he fired at any police officers? With limits of definite proof, yes. If you recall from reading the reports, the time that he was apprehended, in reading the reports and your examination, were you able to formulate an opinion as to his mental state at the time he was apprehended by the police? Yes, I felt so. In arriving at your opinion, do you base your diagnosis solely on what Mr. Johnson has told you? It's based on what information I had, which certainly included some of the information that I already knew. Do you go through a process of weighing what Mr. Johnson told you against what you have learned from the police reports. Yes, those are taken into consideration, how it correlates with other statements. Now, at the time that you examined Mr. Johnson, did you formulate an opinion as to what extent was Mr. Johnson's capacity impaired with regard to his ability to know or understand the nature and quality of his acts on December 6, 2012, at or about 2:30 a.m.? Yes, one tends to formulate some opinions. Okay, this concludes our Q&A practice for the 120 class.